So in the picture you see on the screen, you'll see the treble clef sign over to the left, and there's these two numbers there, a 4 over a 4, and that is called a time signature. And that's going to be the first thing we learn about. You'll also see that there is a little line that has the word bar over it. That's called a bar line. And what the bar line does is it divides our music into sections, and we call those sections measures. Here you see what music would look like if there were two measures in a row. You have two measures, each with 4 little notes in it, and the bar line breaking them up in the middle. So now we're going to find out what those two numbers in the time signature mean. You saw 4 over a 4. So the top number tells us one thing, and the bottom number tells us another thing. So the top number of the time signature is always going to tell us how many counts are in each measure. So when we saw the example of the 4 over 4, the top number was a 4, so we would count to 4 for each measure, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. I didn't count past 4 to 5, I just restarted counting at 1 after 4. So you get patterns of 4. That's the top number. So the bottom number of the time signature is a little bit trickier, and to be honest, we don't have a lot of difference in it this year in 6th grade with the music we're playing. But the number you saw in the first example was a 4 on the bottom. That 4 represents a quarter note, whereas the top note can be any number you want because it just counts the number of notes in or the number of counts in a measure. The bottom number has to be very specific numbers that represent certain types of notes. In that case, the 4 represented a quarter note. We'll talk about what a quarter note is a little bit later. So here are some examples of some popular time signatures that we'll use as we play in middle school band from 6th through 8th grade. You'll see a 2 over 2. The 2 on top tells us that there's 2 counts per measure. The 2 on bottom represents a half note, which we'll talk about later. The 4 over 4 one, that is the most common time signature you'll see. It is what most of the songs on the radio go to. If you listen to most songs on the radio, you can probably count along 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And it's just our way as musicians of dividing things up into patterns. So the first type of note we're going to learn about for rhythm is called a quarter note. You see it on the screen in front of you to the left, and it is a colored in circle note. It's all black, colored in, with a line coming up. We call that line a stem, and that note represents 1 count. So if our time signature was 4 over 4 time, we would have 4 of those quarter notes in each measure. In the song, the video you just watched, the Rhythm Cafe, they used the word chips, 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 chips to represent 4 quarter notes. So that's a quarter note. You'll see a lot of those this year. So here's a measure of 4/4, 4 quarter notes per measure. You would count that 1, 2, 3, 4. The next type of note we're going to talk about is called a half note. Now, if you notice, it looks kind of like a quarter note. It has that stem or line coming up from it, but the half note is not filled in. It's got the open white center to it, and it represents a note that lasts 2 counts. I believe in the Rhythm Cafe video, they used the word T, so instead of going chips, chips, they had a longer note that lasted for 2 of those chips that went T, and that lasts for twice as long as a quarter note since it is 2 counts. So when we're talking about rhythm and duration in class, all of the instruments have different sounds, so it can make it weird when we're trying to learn this all together as a class. So oftentimes, I will have the band kids do this thing called a sizzle. This week, I'm going to teach our in-class kids this, but a sizzle is basically just making a snake sound. All you're doing is thinking about how long you're holding that snake sound. So if I wanted to do 4 quarter notes of sizzle, I would go like this. Tss, 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 tss. That would be 4 quarter notes of a sizzle. If I wanted to do 2 quarter notes and a half note, I would have a quarter note for 1 count, another quarter note for 1 count, and then I'd have a half note for the 3 and the 4th count combined. So it would sound something like this. Tss, tss, tss. So that last note was a little bit longer. It was actually twice as long as the first one. I'll sizzle it one more time, and I'll try to hold my fingers here so you can see the counting. Tss, tss, tss. That last sizzle lasted for the 3rd and 4th count. This is what it looked like for 2 quarter notes and a half note sizzling. Tss, tss, tss. So to help us keep track of the counts in band class, I have the kids tap their foot on the ground. And what they're going to do is they're going to leave their heel of their foot on the ground, and they're just going to tap their toe up and down. Now, it'd be really weird if I recorded my feet for you guys and hold the camera down there. So I want you to pretend that this hand is my foot. This will be my heel. This will be my toes. So when we play, we're constantly doing this with our foot to keep going. Tap, 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 tap. If we're in 4/4 time, our foot will tap with each quarter note going 1, 2, 3, 4. So if I was to sizzle 2 quarter notes in a half note with my foot tapping, I would do 2 things at once. It would sound like this. Tss, tss, tss. So that last sizzle got 2 foot taps or 2 counts. The third type of note we're going to talk about today is the whole note. And it's really just an open circle. You'll see it on either a line or a space, depending on what note you need. But it lasts for 4 counts. And it lasts a whole measure of 4/4 time. And that's where it gets its name, the whole note, because 4/4 is the most common time signature. So the whole note lasts for 4 counts. If you sizzled it, it would be twice as long as a half note, which is 2. So if I show you what a whole note sizzle is like, if you get your foot tapping, it's going to last for 4 foot taps, and it'll sizzle like this. 4 full foot taps. That's the whole note. So if I were to sizzle the 2 measures on your screen, the one at the top first, then the one at the second, it would sound like this. I'll count it off and then sizzle. 1, 2, 3, 4. Tss, 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 tss. There's 4 quarter notes in the first measure, 2 quarter notes and a half note in the second measure. So in music, we use notes to determine what sounds we're hearing, but sometimes you don't hear any sound at all and you have silence. If you were to hear a song and someone was singing all the time without stopping ever, it would be kind of obnoxious. So those pauses, the silences, we call rests. R-E-S-T, rest. The first type of rest we're going to talk about today is called the quarter rest. You see the symbol on the left part of the screen. It kind of looks like a fancy Z or an S, and it lasts for 1 count. So that would replace what a quarter note would be. So instead of sizzling for that count, you're just silent for that count. But your foot would still tap, because it taps on every count. The next type of rest is a 2-count rest called a half rest. In 4/4 time, it takes up 2 counts, which is half of a measure, and it looks like a hat. You'll see the little rectangle box coming up from a line on the staff, and that lasts for 2 counts, the half rest. So just like we have a whole note that lasts for 4 counts, an entire measure of 4/4 time, a whole rest is just 4 counts of silence, and it looks like that half rest, although it's upside down, almost like there's a hole dug out from the line. Hence, whole rest. So on the screen right now are 3 different lines that have examples of rhythms that we will be using in 6th grade band. Now, you're going to hear a little clicking sound in the background coming from my metronome. A metronome is just a thing that keeps time for us, and it would represent what your foot would be doing. It would be tapping every time you hear a foot click. So that little ticking sound is your foot tap. So I'm going to sizzle the first line to show you how this would work. 1, 2, here I go. Tss, 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 tss. So that was the first line. If you want to run that back and practice it with me, that would be great. Now I'm going to count off and sizzle the next one. You're going to hear the clicking sound again. 1, 2, second line. Tss, 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 tss. Notice I did not sizzle where there were the rests. I left it silent. And the last line, you're going to hear the little clicking sound to give you your foot tap. My foot is tapping along with that beat. Here we go. 1, 2, third line. And that's how sizzling to rhythms works.